Night Trap is not a good game, and that doesn't matter. Because unlike most bad games that are so bad they are ironically good, Night Trap is a popular game because of its history. It's a story that's been covered multiple times on YouTube. It's almost a rite of passage to talk about this game's history and how it helped bring censorship to the world of gaming, blah blah blah. But what nobody seems to talk about when talking about Night Trap's history is its horrendous Kickstarter. The controversial 1992 game that is now arguably the most well-known FMV game of all time found its way onto Kickstarter on the 11th of August 2014 and is the textbook definition on how not to run a campaign. One of the most well-known games in video game history was coming back 20 years later, promising gamers the ultimate version that they wish they could have made 20 years earlier. But boy oh boy did they fail every single step of the way. And today I plan to document the entire thing, so hopefully you don't make the same mistakes in Night Trap's terrible Kickstarter. Welcome to Slope's Game Room. But first, just in case you don't know what this game is, here's a super brief history. Hasbro, you know the peeps behind Transformers and My Little Pony. Well, back in the 80s, they were keeping a close eye on what Nintendo were doing. A video game company that managed to shift the public's opinion on how bad video games were, and to be fair, most of the time they were, by not only releasing genuinely good games, but also marketing their system as a toy and not a console. Hasbro wanted in, and why wouldn't they? They make toys already. However, what's quite strange retrospectively is that they didn't use any of their own IPs, but instead, after taking inspiration from literal video games, as in full motion video games such as 1983's Dragon's Lair, which was a game that used full motion video clips that the player would then need to quickly react to in order to continue the story, aka play the next full motion video clip. Whoa! They worked with a company to further progress this angle as home videos were becoming cheaper at the time, and they saw this as their perfect way to get into the business. So, in retrospect, you have a video game company masquerading as a toy company and a toy company masquerading as a video game company. After a lot of trial and error with prototype games and learning how to film a short movie through the lens of several different security cameras all at once, what they eventually ended up with was, of course, Night Trap, or at least the beginnings of what Night Trap would become. Turns out, creating this sort of multi-camera flick and the hardware to run it wasn't easy, and it was super expensive, leaving the original files on the cutting room floor as Hasbro pulled out on developing the Nemo system, which is what would have run this game in the first place. That was until SEGA come along with the Mega CD, better known as the SEGA CD in the States, which was just powerful enough to turn this beautiful project into a pixelated mess of a reality. It sold fairly averagely and it got average reviews, but most importantly, it showed the world not only what Sega's new CD-based add-on was capable of, but more importantly, it was a look at what video games could, and in some respects, would become. For better and for worse. However, sadly, for the time, the PG-rated at worst Night Trap video game that was, let's not forget, toned down during production because, again, let's not forget, Hasbro were involved, found its way into court, alongside some of gaming's more hardcore titles as part of a hearing on the subject of video game violence.
Night Trap, which is a game set in a sorority house. The object is to keep hooded men from hanging the young woman from a hook or drilling their necks with a tool designed to drain their blood. Night Trap uses actual actors and achieves an unprecedented level of realism. What is particularly troubling about the scene in this film that we have an extract of is a graphic depiction of the violence against women with strong overtones of sexual violence. I find this segment deeply offensive and believe that it simply should be taken off the market.
Of course, compared to games such as Mortal Kombat and Doom, for instance, Night Trap was nothing. It was Goosebumps levels of horror. However, when cut up in just the right way with only the absolute worst sections being shown, the game looked far worse than it actually was. Night Trap became the poster child of just how bad video games had become. It was essentially the video nasty of the video game space. And if you don't get that reference, there's a video right there to explain. Everyone was taking a stab at this game. It was pure evil, including, funnily enough, Nintendo themselves.
Nintendo is just as concerned about the issue of violence, whether in movies, television, or video games, as anyone in this room. Of course, every entertainment executive tells Congress that, but Nintendo can back it up. And let me say that for the record, I want to state that Night Trap will never appear on a Nintendo system. Obviously, it would not pass our guidelines.
Shut up, mate. This, of course, brought in the much overdue age rating system, and even though I am sure we can all agree that Night Trap was grossly treated during this time, yeah, the age rating system, that was well overdue. But it's not all doom and gloom, because the sales of Night Trap shot up and then some, as it was released by SEGA with the appropriate rating system attached, firmly cementing the game as one of gaming's most important titles of all time. And yet, no matter what version you got back in the day, it always looked terrible. For all intents and purposes, the Night Trap that everyone remembers was a port. Sure, it had a few extra scenes added, but it was a port, no more, and a hell of a lot less. And no matter what version you got, it was always going to be a downgrade from the original scenes recorded several years prior. And as much as this game is average at best, for someone like me that's into video game history, it is so important, and that's why I was super happy to see it come back just over 20 years later. I do plan to re-release Night Trap and have been talking with a number of interested parties to do so. However, the specific platforms have not been confirmed, including online, and I will let you know once we have a definite plan and release schedule. That was James Riley, the original designer and director of the game, chatting to fans about a remaster of sorts in a tiny Facebook fan group with barely more than 500 people back in 2013. Night Trap will come back in better resolution and gameplay than before. We just want to be sure it's the best strategy for all involved. Of course, this was still enough to garner the attention of plenty of news sites around the world who shared the post, and barely half a year later, James delivered on his promise by making the Kickstarter go live.
I wanna take you for a ride.
A Kickstarter that was beyond terribly managed. Let's take a look. Firstly, the campaign video. Sure, it's great to show that you have the original team talking about how they want to bring the game back, but besides the title itself, absolutely no gameplay footage is shown off whatsoever. It's hard to find out what consoles this game is coming out for besides PC, without watching videos where it's randomly dropped that even the Wii U was possibly getting a copy. Oh, and also, in the early days there didn't seem to be any digital download options either. And then worst of all, you got the price. The team wanted you to pledge $330,000 to bring Night Trap back to life, and that figure simply didn't make sense. Looking at the tiers, it's going to cost you $20 to get a copy of the game for the desired system of your choice, which, if we do the math, is 16,500 copies. And yes, these were again physical copies too in the beginning. Why was the price so damn high? This was one of the main concerns by fans that were looking at the project, when this game is really surely quite easy to port. Thankfully, the team did answer some of these questions on the Kickstarter, which honestly raised more alarm bells than before. as it turns out that part of the bill was going to be paying these 4 guys back for the rights of the game, which they forked out for already. Also, remember when I said the Wii U version was probably coming as a stretch goal? 20 years ago, Nintendo used Night Trap as a lightning rod to attract attention away from problems of its own regarding the game Mortal Kombat. Their behaviour was loutish and disingenuous and hurt everyone in the gaming business. That was a long time ago and many things have changed since then. We bear Nintendo no ill will and certainly bear no ill will towards anyone that owns a Nintendo system, but life is short and you have to pick your targets of opportunity. We simply have no interest in paying licensing fees to a company that once tried very hard to put us out of business. Oh yeah, something tells me you do bear some ill will towards Nintendo. And finally, if all this isn't bad enough, these guys aren't actually making the game. They are outsourcing it to a random third-party lone developer who at this point, they were keeping tight-lipped about. Either way, if the poorly constructed Kickstarter wasn't putting people off, every single update was putting people off. Regardless, the biggest issue that everybody had was the price. $330,000. Why so high? But at the same time, why so low? For every person that cried that Night Trap was asking for too much, you had someone saying that they weren't asking for enough. Physical PS3 and 360 games, purchasing the rights and remastering the game? I don't think so. Thankfully for them, jumping forward to August the 12th, 2014, we get to hear from Tom Zito, as he is interviewed by the popular gaming news site Kotaku. Finally, this is a chance to spread awareness and clear up some of those concerns, right? Well, to start off, we get to hear that the team supposedly paid $250,000 to get the rights to the game from Hasbro. They officially confirmed that the game will now only be available for the 360 and PS3, and then 3 days later they announced that the Wii U was coming too, but I digress. The Night Trap team seemed to snappily respond to the too much money question with the following: "If we didn't think this was the right number, we would have gone with something else." And as the interview went on, the bad vibes continued. "Do you have anything to say to specific concerns? A concrete reason people should believe in you despite evidence that's giving them pause?" Well, it's not for everybody. Clearly nothing is for everybody. That's not really what I meant though. I mean, like for example, money. Some people think you're asking for too much, others think it's too little. People don't know what to think. Maybe more clarity on how you plan to pull this off would be good. That just shows that lots of people have lots of different opinions. I decided to pull up what people were saying on Twitter to give him a better idea on how folks were feeling. But then he abruptly cut the interview short. "I really have to go. I've got to deal with my son right now." I attempted to thank him for his time, but he'd already hung up. As you would expect, this opportunity to clear the air and raise awareness for the game ended in even more backlash towards the campaign, as even more news sites jumped on board to ridicule the terrible management of this campaign and that interview. Looking back, if some people are thinking he's asking for too much and other people think he's not asking for enough, then maybe it's the right amount? Who knows? But the point is, all backers wanted was some peace of mind, not because they're nosy know-it-alls, but because they are the ones fronting the money, and with so many terrible kickstarted horror stories out there, isn't it a good thing to be transparent? The next update we got on August 16th was really interesting for someone like me, looking into the history of the game and why to this day, these guys still hold a serious grudge against Nintendo. You see, it turns out that Night Trap was originally going to be coming out on the Nintendo PlayStation. Remember the stories of that CD-based add-on that Sony was making for the Super Nintendo before Nintendo screwed them over at the 11th hour, resulting in Sony using that tech to create Nintendo's biggest future rival, the PlayStation. Well, turns out that Nintendo over these guys too, as they promised the team that they would be the preferred software publisher for the upcoming system. That was until Nintendo threw them under the bus when all of that violence in video game rubbish come out.
We didn't want Nintendo's name associated with this kind of product.
Oh, you sneaky little... Either way, as interesting as this may be from a historic point of view, it's time to move on, mate. Releasing a retro or indie-like game on Kickstarter and not making it available for the Wii U, as discussed before on the show, at this point in time is seriously stupid. But hey ho, that's par for the course with this campaign, and as no new updates came about and it became more and more apparent that it was never going to get funded, a final update was posted and the campaign was closed. How bad a job have we done? This update goes into detail about how the rewards were not good enough, they did a terrible job at getting the name out there, and they overestimated the demand as apparently over 4 million people landed on the Kickstarter page or pages that talked about the Kickstarter, yet it ended at only 12% of the goal and 664 people backing the project. And that was the end of the Kickstarter. A Kickstarter that wanted to bring back one of gaming's most iconic titles in a way that it was always meant to be seen. But it had no concept footage, there was no proof that it could actually ever get done, there was no money breakdown like you see on other popular campaigns, virtually no word of mouth from the campaign owners themselves was done, and when it was done, it was way worse than not doing anything at all. The tiers were broken, a 25-year-old gripe with Nintendo pushed away Nintendo fans that likely would have backed it themselves, and quite simply, the numbers just don't add up. Thankfully, hardcore fans do still exist, and that's why the game was eventually released. And get this, it was released on a Nintendo system, with a teen rating as well.
And let me say that for the record, I want to state that Night Trap will never appear on a Nintendo system.
In short, once the campaign was done and dusted, the developer Tyler Hogle created a prototype of the game working on mobile phones in order to grab the attention of the rights owners, which it did, and eventually he got to work on the remaster, which is quite honestly the best this game could ever be. And then obviously Limited Run released several limited edition versions of the games for multiple consoles, and voila. If you're interested in the history of Night Trap outside of the Kickstarter, then I highly suggest the My Life in Gaming documentary, which can be found in the description. Well worth a watch as it shows everything that happened outside of the Kickstarter, and also whilst you're over there, make sure you hit their subscribe button too. That is after you hit the subscribe button on this channel. So what are your thoughts on Night Trap the game? What are your thoughts on this Kickstarter? Is this the biggest non-funded failure of a Kickstarter ever? Let me know your comments down below. And if you have a campaign that you would like me to talk about, why not join my Discord server and share it? And if you want to support the show and get access to the secret password zone where you can check out hundreds, if not thousands of hours of content, all ad and sponsor free, then support the show for as little as you wish on Patreon or as a YouTube member. This will indeed grant you access to this, plus you'll get a crazy amount of other perks too. Just like everyone you see on the bottom of the screen. Yes, a massive shout out to all of these awesome people, with an extra big shout out going to Boots and Pup, The Sneaky Ferret, Ray Blair, Vitus Varnus, Aggro Crag, James, The Action Saxon, Roll VP, Jay's Manchild, Clan Bob, Mike Fallon, Nicholas Bertner, Chev Matic, Jabba Al Aiden, Benjamin Guy, Richard Alderjick, Shadow Dragon, Wobbles and Bean, The Wonder Ducks, Dina, Ye Old Hamburglar, Jeff Mianowski, Bram Perez, Conrad Constantine, Andrew Dalton, Todd Paul Flochi, Ryan Burford, Casey Samples, Over Joel Zane, That Gamer, Shade Silence, Kat Layton, Sir Nilsson, Stephen, Derekuda, Akatimo84, John Rogers, Matt Jackson, Ian Quell, Arista, Dina81, Mind of the Unsane, and Vike Echo. Thank you to all of the people I've just mentioned, and for all of you guys watching too. As stated, if you want to get access to the Sloped Password Zone, see what I'm working on, special rooms in the Discord, plus loads of other random perks, then go and sign up down below as a Patreon or YouTube member. But until next time, guys, this is DJ Slope signing out, and hopefully I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.